Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. We are going to call the meeting to order at 6:05. Is that all right with everybody? Okay. Business item today is discussion of the impact to the Sanford School Department due to the updated standard operating procedures from Maine CDC for responding to a positive COVID case in schools and the consideration of further recommendations and/or requirements.
So when we came back after the holiday break in early January, the Maine CDC had adjusted the SOP for handling positive cases and had done that with the idea of really reducing the isolation times and the quarantine times. And a lot of that was being done with the intent of trying to keep kids in school. That was concerns that superintendents and parents and people had been talking about. And so that was a change in our SOP that came back in January, at the beginning of January, and we did send that out. That also coincided with the Omicron variant, and so we were also seeing some increased cases. And with the increased cases, the challenges that we were facing as a school district was in the area of contact tracing. And so with the contact tracing, there was such a burden with the high cases that we had and the burden that that was placing on our school nurses and also on our administrators to be able to continue the contact tracing as we've been doing it all along. So there was a group of superintendents, one representative from all regions of the state that was meeting with the Maine CDC, and they were really looking at contact tracing. And we were also expecting some updates to the SOP. And so that information came out, and that was released yesterday. And so from the Maine Department of Education, we did get an updated SOP. And that updated SOP was in the areas of contact tracing. And so with that, they revised their SOP to allow schools that have a universal masking policy to choose to suspend contact tracing in light of the transmissibility of the Omicron variant and the impact on the effectiveness of contact tracing. The Maine CDC has determined that because the Omicron variant is far more contagious than prior variants, it has a shorter incubation period and it tends to spread in the early part of an infection, it is contributing to the higher levels of community transmission, making community exposures more frequent, and consequently reducing the effectiveness of contact tracing in schools. So while the goal of contact tracing is to provide a timely notification to all individuals who may have been exposed to COVID-19, with that, it is becoming very difficult, if not impossible, for school personnel given how fast the Omicron variant is spreading. And so their revised SOP permits schools with a universal masking policy. In the Sanford School Department, we do have a universal masking policy to effectively, in order to help us in those areas, we're now able to not have contact tracing. Okay, and so that was one piece of it. We were also expecting that the SOP may address a couple other areas regarding the isolation and quarantine periods that they had reduced. And so that has not been changed. and that has not been addressed. And so what we were, so that information came out yesterday. I met with our school administrative team in the morning to check in with them. And then Steve and I met with our school nurses in the afternoon to check in with them to make sure in line of where we were with the new updated SOP and the changes to contact tracing. And so we have that as we went through in terms of yesterday. Now, right along with that, as we've seen increased cases, as you know, as you've been following along, one of the priorities that I have as superintendent is to continue to have us have in-person learning as long as we can do that safely. Some of the concerns that we have been the increased cases and the impact that's having on us. And for us, I'm committed to having us have in-person learning as long as we can do that safely and that we can have the appropriate staffing and the appropriate certification, supervision. And so that's been challenging all along for us, as you know that, as we've navigated this going on 2 years now, especially as we've been back in person, that are we going to be able to have the staffing? One of the things that we've done as a proactive measure was that we, realizing that there was the possibility that we would not be able to have school or open a school because of staffing, that we wanted to make sure that if needed, we would be ready to pivot and to be able to move to remote learning. Though that's not what anyone's choice would be, it may be something that circumstances have done that. One of the things that we did was, looking at that to be proactive, is we worked with our administrators, we worked with our teachers, and the K through 12, we then were at the point where we were sending technology home. That was a big change for our elementary students who normally are not having their technology go home. It probably also raised a lot of people's anxiety in terms of, oh, it looks like that the schools are going to be able to go remote. We, in hindsight, I should have done something as a superintendent district-wide to send out a message rather than leave that to the individual schools and the individual principals to kind of talk about that it doesn't mean it's going to happen. This is just so that if it does, we wouldn't have to make arrangements to get the technology in the hands of students. We'd already have it in their hands. And so that was now, if you look in York County, also last Friday, one of our neighbors, near us, the York School Department, did go fully remote. They went their entire district K through 12. And for them, one of the major drivers of that decision was staffing. And when we talk about staffing, it's not per se a number of staff oftentimes. It's not like there's a magic number. It's also who are in those particular positions that then could be able to make sure that you wouldn't be able to have school. And so that was a decision that the York School Department made to go remote this week with the plan of returning to school on Tuesday. Also in York County, you had Kennebunk School Department and the Biddeford School Department and the Saco School Department. Those areas, they've gone remote only at the middle school and high school levels. And we had a York County Superintendent's meeting yesterday morning, and the reasons for them going were also related to staffing. My sense is that people are looking at trying to do their best to be committed to offering in-person learning safely. As you look at how our attendance has been, and I do have some figures out that I did pass out to let people know attendance, because one of the other changes in the SOP back at the beginning of January was that they had a new definition for school outbreak. And a new definition for school outbreak, previously it used to have been 3 cases that were connected in a school would get you an outbreak. Well, we've been in outbreak all fall and up through the holiday break with that definition in all of our schools. The new definition would be that if you had a 15% or more of your students and staff were absent, and those absences were related to COVID. So as we've come back, we have had increased cases in the district. And so if you look at our attendance this week, we had 2 schools that were below that 15%. They were below 85%. That would be the middle school and the high school. All the other schools were over 85%. On Tuesday, that remained. We had the middle school and the high school were both under 85%. On Wednesday, yesterday, we had the high school and middle school were also under 85%. The middle school was at 84%. The high school was at just under 75%. We also had Carl J. Lamb School yesterday. They were below the 85%. They were at 83.2%. And then today, Carl J. Lamb was back up, and the middle school and the high school were still underneath that 15%. I did receive a phone call today from the Maine CDC letting us know that we were in a outbreak status at Sanford Middle School. Due to our absent rate, she had talked to Caitlin, our school nurse. As I spoke with her, she was clear that we do not need to set down operations at this time, that we do have things in place appropriately, but it would be something that they'd want us to continue to monitor to see if there's some things that escalate in terms if there's any other mitigation strategies that we want to put in place to be able to do that. In order for us to get out of outbreak status, we would have to make sure that our absenteeism is above that 15%, and it's just not getting it for 1 day, it would be doing it for 14 days consecutively, and that would get you out of where you are in the outbreak. As I was talking to Jill, my expectation is at the CDC that we would also probably be looking at our high school qualifying for that, as well as possibly Carl J. Lamb. So I think in light of everything of where we are, one of the questions that's before us this evening is we do have the SOP, and the question would be when you have an SOP, we have been very consistent in our following of that SOP right from the beginning. We've had fidelity to that SOP, but that doesn't, and the expectation is that schools would follow that, but there's nothing that's preventing schools from also coming in and going further with things beyond where the SOP is at. And so Right now, that's why I think, as I was talking with members of the school committee with everything that's going on, I think that was where there was some energy for us to be able to say, whoa, with everything that's going on, it probably makes sense for the school committee to come together and be able to get an update on where things are at and whether or not we have to make any updates or changes or things that we need to do from the Sanford School Department.
Hey, Matt, are you looking for guidance from us? Is that what you're looking for right now? Because I will offer what my opinion is we have followed the SOP from the get-go. And I'm going to say we should probably continue to do that with the caveat that if we have to pivot next week, 3 days from now, 5 days from now, we pivot and do something different. But since we have done and followed this from the get-go, I just think it's the right thing to do. I mean, there are other things that I would like to do to strengthen it up, but there was other ramifications if we did, and I just think that what we really should be doing is following the standard operating procedures. And if we pivot, if we have to pivot, we will.
And I know, John, a lot of ways I feel the same way. That I think that is probably the approach I would recommend. I also want to point out that there are situations that have come to our attention as we look at that SOP, especially when we speak to our school nurses, that are around a couple things. One, a lot of it is we're finding that this variant is really working its way right through families quickly. And so with the SOP, that would allow people to come to school. Steve, correct me if I'm, make sure I have this right, that if they're asymptomatic, even if they have a positive case in their household, they would be still allowed to come to school. Whereas, and so that's an area where I think that's concerning because you may have people who are at that time asymptomatic, but they also may be coming on symptomatic later on in terms of where that is. And so that's been something that has been identified. I know for us, as we hear from families, that anytime you have people that are out of school when they are asymptomatic and healthy, that can be very challenging for our families to be able to do that, especially in light of where they are in their jobs and their occupations, to be able to come and do that. So that might be, as I look at it, rather than requiring those people to stay out of school, that may be something where we can, as the Sanford School Department, strongly recommend and have conversations with those families in situations where hopefully they have the means where those people can be held out. Especially, I'm not sure that has to be something in a long-term sense, but I would probably say especially with where things are at right now in Sanford.
So,
And in York County. I also want people to know what we're challenging in Sanford is also what is also being challenged in the other schools statewide, but also especially in York County.
okay, so just to kind of distill everything and make it as simple as possible, right now, if somebody in a house is positive, as long as the kids and everybody else is vaccinated and they're not showing symptoms, they can go about their business.
And also with our universal masking.
And with universal masking,
universal
because
masking.
of those two things.
Yeah,
Okay,
the universal masking is key. Yeah.
Okay.
So can I say one thing? Just to go with what you just said, Paula, what the current SOP is, from what I'm reading it doesn't matter if you're vaccinated or not. If mom, dad, sister, brother, cousin, Grammy, if one has positive in the house, because we are universal masking, period, kids can continue to come to school regardless because we are universal masking. It does not matter if they're vaccinated or not.
And it's the universal masking that is absolutely, is Amy's right, that is the piece. If we did not have a universal masking, then that would not be allowed.
Okay. And so, I'm so sorry, John. And so then the question that we are posting here tonight is, do we amend that SOP?
I serve at the will of the board, and so that was something where the school committee was looking at wanting to be able to have an emergency meeting with that. So that is, that's probably what is in front of us tonight, is there's questions of, do we want to continue offering in-person learning, or do we want to shift to going fully remote? And then the other issues would be, are there anything that we want to do to go further than what the SOP states?
Okay, so can I should we go ahead then and just kind of put it out there and say, so do we want to go remote or do we want to stay in? And then, depending on that choice, we move forward with the meeting, or?
I would encourage a little more participation. I know where you're going with it. I don't know where you're going with it. I feel where you're going with it. I keep looking at the numbers, and we can talk about 15% all we want, but I'm more concerned about the other 85. If we go remote, those are families that can't go to work, that may not receive a paycheck. The economy suffers, employers suffer. But personally, we have employees I know that if we go remote, a couple of folks aren't going to be able to go to work. And I'm sure our company is not the only one. So I'm not doing that for myself, but I'd say, oh boy. So again, I would like to focus on the 85%. And I kiddingly, I think I said to John the other day, if students can be in school, and I don't want to minimize education. It's been hindered for a couple of years now. We talk about social, emotional, and loss of learning. Okay, let's put that aside for a second. If kids can be in school doing, I'll go back to my life skills. If we do nothing but teach kids life skills for the next 3 months, at least they're in school learning something. Being home, high school kids, those with licenses are still roaming around. Who knows what they're doing? They're still socializing. For those that have to be absent, they have to be absent. I don't know where I think I can change or modify, or even agree to modify what the CDC has stated. Who am I to override that? So I'll stop for a second.
Yeah, it gets back to, as I mentioned, we had the change in the SOP came down with that, so we just want to make sure that part of that is making sure our community knows. I am willing, ready to send something out this as late as tomorrow morning to let families know that kind of where we stand in terms of going forward, in terms of how we're going to be approaching in-person learning and the remote question. And then I also think that initially, as we had those concerns, I wanted to wait to see if they were already addressed by the changes in the SOP. They were not addressed in the changes in the SOP, so that's why I think we called this meeting, just to make sure that everything that we're doing is making sure that it continues to ideally work for our students, our staff, our families, and the Sanford community.
Right. So I guess my question is, for the sake of organizing and efficiency in the meeting, should we first pose and decide the question of whether we're going to go remote or not? Because I'm sure everybody that's on Zoom right now is probably on pins and needles waiting to see if that is what we're going to do. So could we decide that first and then move forward and say, okay, if we are going to keep the school open, then do we amend the SOP or not? Or if we're going to go remote, then how do we move forward from there? Is that something that we can do, just for the sake of?
Yeah, so if do you want me to make a motion?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if there's a motion as much as just continuing on for us to make sure that people are comfortable with the approach that is currently in place.
Right.
For us to be able to do what we can, in-person learning safely, with the understanding that a lot of that comes back to staffing and appropriate supervision in the safety in that respect.
So I guess we don't need the motion then, other than we'll just continue on it, continue as is right, for step one?
Well, my question then is, you met with everybody. What does everybody say? I mean,
My
what do you
sense
hear
is,
from the
and
staff?
Steve, you were in both meetings with that right now, I think as challenging as it is, we value in-person learning and doing that safely, and that I think would be what we're looking to do. If it can be accomplished, I think that would be what the majority of people would be looking for us to do.
Okay.
Just add to that, but John, I know, I can hear you now, where you're probably going to go with, and I think I support the fact that let's not change a darn thing. Whether it takes a motion and a second and a vote and so forth, so be it, but it may not. I absolutely respect what everybody in this room and across the land is going through. I have a deep, I'm not a nurse. I have a great respect for what the nurses are going through in the schools. From what I hear, it's hell. And that goes for teachers and anybody else working yourself. I mean, you're working your tail off, all of you are. We get to come to a meeting and kind of be the final say. I'm the last one to have the final say, but if we have it, I want kids in school learning the basics. I would say to the teachers, put the textbooks away and teach them, as I said, teach them a budget, teach them at varying levels, work with them on life skills and keep them engaged responsibly, and just shift a little bit, but keep them in school and do the best you can.
Can I say something?
Go ahead,
Hi,
Amy.
everyone. Hey. So I for one I agree with Jonathan that I definitely want the kids in school, and we should be thinking about the kids who are the ones that are going and attending. So I, for one, are, obviously staffing. If there's not enough staff, then, Matt needs to make that decision. But I definitely am for one for keeping the schools open right now, as day by day if we have to. But the part that, if we're going to the SOP, that I am going back, honestly, I'm going back and forth. And I am a nurse, so I am living it, not in the schools, but in the hospital setting, is the one, because when I read the SOP, when that got sent down, I was excited that there was no more contact tracing. I was excited for a lot of the things. However, knowing how rampant that this is running in the homes, definitely seeing it in the hospital setting for sure, definitely seeing it in our workforce for sure, that when you have a positive case in the home, I just feel like it's the right thing to do to keep your family home for 5 days, because what we are seeing is that people in the home are becoming positive day 4 and day 5, not right away. And so I am going back and forth because I do believe in the CDC and their recommendations. So I'm going back and forth saying, okay, let's just go with what they're saying and not tighten things up. But there is a part of me that is saying we really should be really strongly encouraging our families to keep their family members home for 5 days, because we don't want this to just continue, running rampant through the schools, because it is.
And Amy, just as we had talked about yesterday, that was something, as we talked with our school nurses, they're very relieved that the contact tracing is not going to continue, but I want to make sure that our community understands that, because I think that is pretty major. We send something out every day with the positive cases that we have throughout the district, but we've also been doing a lot of other, allowing families to know that, and we've reached a point. And after Dr. Shaw's press briefing yesterday, that the methods that we've been using need to change when you're talking about the new variant that's there. And that's where you're not looking at contact tracing. But I think we're also concerned, as Amy's pointed out, about how in those areas it can be moving pretty fast. And so I think that's one of the questions that's before us before the school committee this evening, is whether or not we want to look at that SOP in terms of that's something that we could, the school committee could make a decision to require, or as Amy talked about, it could be strongly recommended in terms of how we're able to handle some of those situations that might be helping in certain situations.
Go ahead, Jen.
Thank you. I would just like to, my perspective is that amending the SOP prohibits kids from being in school essentially, whether it's done in a formal capacity or we are making a strong suggestion. And I don't think that we have the data to support amending a document that came from the CDC and DOE. We've been at this a long time. Masks, universal masking is the reason that we have been able to stay open previously in outbreak status. You know, transmission is not happening in school. So yes, is it happening rampantly in homes? Yes. Are they masked in their home? No. So amending the SOP prohibits kids from the opportunity to be in in-person learning. And that's essentially our goal, is to have folks in in-person learning. If it was the Wild Wild West and we went to school and nobody masked and you shared water bottles and this, that, and the other, but I think we need to be confident in the work that we have done as a school department, you know, with our strategies, our mitigation strategies, you know, and I think that when we start to err on guidance, you know, how many school nurses do we have? You know, are you getting the same story from every school nurse? You've got kids in 3 different schools, you know, and you're hearing one version of what the recommendation is from one school and another recommendation from a different nurse at a different school. It just really muddies the waters, and I think we can just keep it simple. We have an SOP. It came from the people who are, you know, earmarked to make that SOP. You know, I agree with you. Unless we have egregious staff absences, you know, we keep the doors open and we put our heads down and we do hard things.
I agree. So I guess the question now is, I mean, do we want to hear from anybody else? Or does anybody else have anything to? Okay, so John, you're saying you want to stay, you don't want to change the SOP, you want to move forward the way it is?
Yeah, I want to stay.
I do too.
With the SOP, because we could just, if it's not working, right now, that's what they're recommending, and, you know, it could change, and we can change. If we find next week, the week after, we can change, but why do it now when we were told yesterday or today, whatever, that is what we should be doing? And the things, I can't disagree with what Amy's saying, but I want to go with what they're saying, and if we have to change, we'll change. I just want those kids, as Jonathan, I wholeheartedly agree that, you know, if we could get 85% of students in the building, that's better than 0.
Okay.
Well, and I think we just have to recognize too that, like, we have the opportunity in real time to analyze data. So if Matt's getting an email from, you know, Miss Karen's, you know, first grade classroom, and Miss Karen has 23 students typically, you know, let's say she has 2 to 3 kids that are regularly absent, and now all of a sudden she's got 18 of her 23, I think we have a mitigation problem in that classroom, you know? And so until we get to that point where we have real data that's showing us that what we're doing isn't working, then we just stay the course.
Yeah, the whole part about making a suggestion that if you're sick, stay home, I mean, that's sort of what we do for everything anyway, right?
Well, in this case, it would be beyond that, because that's what we're doing. This would be in situations where there's people who are asymptomatic with that. That, as I think Amy pointed it out, that, you know, what happens is that's where it is, but it could be days later that's not.
Right.
That you do have people who are then becoming symptomatic, or in some cases, not even symptomatic, but being able to be able to test positive.
Okay, so I want to say that I'm perfectly fine you having the SOP the way that it is and moving forward like this, knowing that if we need to, we can pivot depending on what the data shows. John, you're saying the same thing too? Jonathan Mapes, you too? Jen, you as well? Amy? How do you feel?
Going back and forth about that one little caveat there about the families. I don't know. We do have one of the school nurses raising her hand on Zoom.
Can we hear from her?
Hi, I think both Lynn and I want to speak to a couple things that have been said tonight. There is in-class, in-school transmission happening. That's a false statement being made that there is not. And also about the nurses giving 5 different instructions. We are following the SOP like we have for the last year, for this school year, and for last school year for 21, 22 months. We don't give different information, so I'm not sure where that is coming from. And currently, what we do when they have a positive individual in the home, our recommendations are to keep your kids home, but we also tell them that SOP does not require that. So we are already strongly recommending that they do stay home if there's positives in the home. So without some short-term requirement for that to happen, this is not going to end anytime soon. And that is a huge risk of us going remote. I think Lynn wanted to speak as well.
I did, if I could. I agree. I think what Jen was saying was not that we're giving different guidance, but that nurses would report different things at each school, where there's, maybe some school nurses are seeing transmission in their school and some aren't. I'm assuming that's what you meant, Jen. There's definitely transmission in the schools. I don't think it's black and white. I don't think it needs to be one option or the other, remote or not remote. I think we should stay in school. I think the only way we're going to be able to stay in school is if we could be stricter than the SOP. The worst thing the CDC could have done is change the guidance to 5 days for students and staff who are positive. And that's why the transmission is out of control, because they're coming back and they're still infectious, because we all know that you're infectious for 10 days with COVID. So they're coming to school on day 6, they're eating lunch with everybody. They're telling everybody that I have COVID and I'm back at school. People are freaking out about that. If we can be stricter and say 10 days isolation for those who are positive, and then we've always strongly suggested families stay home. Students stay home if they have COVID in the family because of the constant contact. But I don't think it has to be one or the other. I think we can stay open, we can have stricter guidelines, and continue doing what we're doing. Thank you.
Matt, do we have data for in-school transmission?
Yeah, I think as we start to look at that, it's hard to pin that down, but I also think as we start to look at it, that has been something over where we could point to earlier in this, that it wasn't school transmission. I think now it's harder and harder to do that in terms of to be able to come back and say, no, there isn't. That's probably a recent development, as you can hear from our school nurses as they start to come back and be able to look at that. A lot of it comes down to following the guidelines that we have in place, and a lot of that's coming back with the face coverings and the appropriate face coverings and wearing those, and also doing our best to try to keep the distances the best that we can in doing that. So.
Well, and I think there's probably fatigue, right? Everybody, every kid, everybody in the building is fatigued. Have we had the discussion about offering upgraded masks?
We've not had that discussion. What I would, before going to that discussion, what I would recommend is that we appropriately wear the face coverings that we have. That, to me, I think is getting something that is tightly fitting and something that is above where it's supposed to be so it can do what it wants to. That would be where my starting point is in terms of that.
So are you seeing that as an issue of what's being provided? Do we need to make an adjustment? Because I'm confused about appropriately wearing the face coverings when we're 22 months in. I mean,
Yeah, I'm not sure, Jen, I understand what appropriate masking you're talking about. I don't think we have access to that, is what I suspect. And that's not something that is being provided through the PE, through the Department of Education. And from what I'm being told, I'm also concerned about our ability to be able to get that. Therefore, you can see why I'm going with the idea of saying, I think as you heard yesterday in his press briefing, Dr. Shaw was talking about what we have in place is effective if it's being done appropriately and being used that way. Does that mean the others couldn't in some ways be more effective? I'm not saying that. I'm saying in terms of what we have and the appropriate use of it.
I think what Jen is saying is right. I think it was one of the folks on TV, the N95, KN95s, I don't know the lingo for those, are better than these. These allow some, I'll just call them vapors, to escape, whereas the better ones are better for the newest virus. But if we can encourage that, it's probably all the best we can do, because availability is a problem.
Yeah.
However, what Dr. Shaw said just the other day was that, you know, the ones that you're wearing right now, the regular surgical masks that you can buy anywhere, those are the best to do, other than an N95. You're not going to ask a kid to wear an N95 all day at school, but the cloth ones are probably not the best choice to be wearing to school at this point.
And I think, isn't it the cloth ones, Matt, that were being provided at the middle school anyway? Like those white cloth masks are what they give out, like when children are walking in for the day that do not have a mask.
Yeah, we were providing the cloth ones. We also have started to provide some medical ones, the ones that Matt and I have on for both staff and students. Yep.
The positive here, Matt, is kudos to you guys for getting the devices out to the students, because if we do have to change gears, then we're ready to do that. But I think it seems fairly clear to me that, stay the course.
Matt, do you feel we need a vote or not? A public vote, or are we just going to stay the course?
I'm planning on staying the course unless there's something else, there's action taken this evening to do otherwise.
So staying the course is staying with the SOP as it is right now and continue open school and using masks. Okay.
I really would, Matt, I remember your opening comments at Alumni Stadium to the teachers, spend some time getting to know the students, and I think we're still in that arena. I would want the teachers to try to, breathe a little bit better and not be so stressed about the academic portion of school. Just take care of the kids and yourselves. And I don't know how better to word that. I'm not a teacher, but I would teach them something.
And I think what I'd use this opportunity to talk about a few things. One, the plan is to send something out to families tomorrow. It'd be really around in two particular areas. It'd be talking about the idea about us sending that technology home and what us are looking in terms of going to remote. I think that was something that was anxiety proving to a lot of people, a lot of families saying, oh, here it comes. They're just getting ready to go remote. And that's an option. We still could. We could be doing that this evening or tomorrow morning. I wanted people to know a lot of that would be around staffing. That would be primarily doing that. Doesn't mean that we're also not going to monitor, too, to feel like if we can't continue to do things safely, then that we'd be able to look at that decision. The other piece I want to talk about is the idea of the recent changes around contact tracing, because our families have come to know that. Tremendous work done by our school nurses to be able to get that information out, and that's going to be a change in terms of that. And I also want to use the opportunity to talk about and to reinforce that we need to make sure that all of us are conducting daily symptom checks. We need to stay home when we're sick or symptomatic. We need to wear our face mask and face coverings appropriately. We can't have the fatigue of that. Wash and sanitize your hands frequently. We have to pay attention to distancing. whenever we can. We realize that at the end of the day, that is challenging when it comes into schools. I know in some ways there may be situations where it's so hard for people to get tests that they may send their student to school when they are sick or symptomatic, and I would ask them, please do not do that. The tests that we do have, we don't have those for that purpose. The tests that we have are able to help us, the Binax Now, when it revolving around those who become symptomatic during the day, so that we can contain this as quickly as we can, and also around our pool testing in terms of helping us be able to determine where the positive pools are. I'd want to use that opportunity, and then I would also put in another plug, and we will continue to do this, that with families that have positive cases within their families, we have to be very, very careful about that. In terms of having those people coming into school, that would where we'd want to come in and be able to push that strong recommendation for people to be able to address that. Those, I think, would be, as we come back, to be able to look on, if we weren't pointing those points of emphasis and we weren't pointing that out and making that point, then I also don't think we're doing, and I'm not doing everything that we need to do to be able to communicate that appropriately.
Okay. So we don't need a vote? We don't need, okay.
So Paula?
Yep.
Just
Yes.
because I'm on the Zoom, there's, are we allowing the public and parents to speak tonight? Because there's people that would like to. I don't know, because I'm seeing like hands are raising over here and
Right,
it's
'cause I'm not
awkward for
seeing-
me to not acknowledge it.
Yeah, thank you, because I'm not seeing any of that. Matt, can we,
That's a chair decision.
oh, all right. So, yeah, I think it's necessary to have people speak.
I would, as we always say in public participation, it's, limit the time and try not to be redundant. If somebody's already said what you're going to say, please don't say it again.
Right, and please be aware that there might be a lot of people that want to speak, and if we could limit it to 2 minutes, that would be greatly appreciated. That way we can hear from everybody that wants to speak. Sarah, is there?
Andrea Baldwin, I see your hands up.
Yes, so I actually work in the library at the high school. I'm the library ed tech. I've been listening to this meeting, and I have to tell you, one of the reasons why we have transmission issues is because children are not wearing their masks correctly. We are constantly telling children all day long to put their noses back in their masks. It is a constant struggle because these children are children. They are not taking this seriously. So the transmissions are happening and the teachers are stressed out, they're frustrated. And the fact is the burnout is real. And the fact is these children, there's a huge amount of children that are wearing their masks correctly, but there is a large percentage that we are constantly looking at them day in and day out. Put your noses back in your mask. I actually just had a set of students talk back to me because I told them to put their noses back in their masks because they don't care, because they're children. And we have to remember that these are children.
Okay, thank you for that. Andrea, is there a way that we could address that? Do we have, like in every class, do we have a little?
I think she said they're constantly reminding their children to do that, and they're not. I think that's a battle that is difficult to win.
I mean, do we have some sort of school-wide classroom? Every
can look into-
classroom stops for a second
We'll
and
look
says,
into that,
hey.
obviously, to help reset that, to make sure that that isn't, where you get slippage in that area. We've got to be able to come back because, it's super important. with that. So those are the things that we can try to be able to do to continue to be able to stress that. I started with that this evening. I think you saw in terms of what we're looking at, for us to be working and for it to be able to go with the universal masking, it has to be worded correctly. It's just not something that we're being thrown on and not doing it correctly.
Right.
I know a surrounding district of ours, they have a 3-strike policy. 3 strikes, you go home. You get 3 strikes. You know, I don't know if it's working. You know, we could certainly reach out to them and ask them if it is working. Massapequa. 3 strikes.
Heather Nelson is the next parent who'd like to speak.
Hi, I just wanted to know if not all kids have, you know, the perfect, like, healthy immune system. There's, you know, some kids that don't have a good immune system. Is there an option like last year, you know, that they can go remote if needed, and the other kids can go in class?
There isn't right now, is there, Matt?
No, we do not have a remote option, nor are there plans at this time. That's something that I think we will be monitoring, as well as the other York County superintendents will also be monitoring that to see if that's going to have to be something that is changed down the line.
Okay, thank you, Heather.
Lance Honig?
I guess just a follow-up question to that. It's the same topic. If you've got so many kids coming and going and missing school, and you want them home for 10 days, if the family member tests positive, and you've got a bunch of parents that are concerned about the whole thing, why isn't it an option for kids that are either quarantining, self-quarantining at home, or who parents are uncomfortable with them going to school? It would seem to me that it would allow kids that are going to school to have more space and spread out and reduce transmission if that's what you're trying to do. So I guess as I watch this meeting, it's curious to me that it's not even on the table to have sort of a hybrid option. Thank you.
I don't even know where to, I mean, the hybrid option is basically what we were
Is
doing
this
last year.
public comment, or are
right?
we going to be answering questions all night? To me, I think it's a very slippery slope that, as we speak
Okay,
back to,
yeah.
I think that that's something we'll take into
Right.
consideration to be able to come back and do that.
Okay, any other? Okay, thank you so much for the comments. We are taking everything into consideration and working as hard as we can to make sure that we do the best that we can for the entire district. So, meeting adjourned? Yes, Matt? Okay, so meeting adjourned at 7 o'clock.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much, everybody.